Hi everyone, thanks for tuning in to another tutorial. So today I wanted to do a quick one explaining how to set up a baking workflow in RenderMan for Maya. Baking basically is the process of converting your procedural patterns to 2D textures, which can save you at render time so it doesn't have to compute those patterns each and every time you render. So on my screen I have two renders up, so I chose to demonstrate this on these granite boulders as part of the Woodville Pixar challenge. So these granite boulders, I've got a base granite shader, and then I have a moss shader that I've layered on top using a layered PXR layered surface. And the mask for that is driven using a PXR curvature along with some other dirt maps and etc. But um, our end goal here, and what I want to show you, is we can get from, in this example, a 13-minute 8-second render time down to a 10-minute 27-second render time just by baking out the mask for this moss. So I'll walk you through that in Maya. We can set it up, and you can apply that to, it can be masks, you can bake it out, if you're doing projected textures, you can bake those out as well. But for the sake of this demonstration, I'm going to show you how to bake out, or what I'm doing to bake out the mask for this moss here. So a pretty considerable render time difference, even on just this small subset. So you can imagine on a large scene with many procedurals, or even an animated sequence, this will add up quickly. So it's definitely worth doing and getting familiar with. So over in Maya, let's take a look at the scene here. It's just a subset of the Woodville Art Challenge scene, just with the boulders isolated out just to demonstrate this. Um, and before we start looking at the shaders and baking, we need to lay out UVs for these rocks. Now, since we're going from a procedural to a 2D texture, each one of these boulders needs to have its own UV space. So a 2D texture can be written out for that. So in order to accomplish this, we're going to need to set up UDIM tiles for each one of these rocks. That way the baking can write out a texture for each one, and then it can read it in, at render time. So to do that, and before I start, I noticed there's a few, and I've already done this for a few, some of these objects are actually combined, so I'm going to go ahead and do a mesh separate on that, just so they're all fairly uniform, so all these rocks are now separate. So I did that over here as well. So we did that. So in order to set them up in UV, and also something to note here is none of these have UVs. So all these rocks are blank. So what I'm going to end up doing, and since these aren't hero assets by any means, I'm just going to end up doing an automatic projection on all of them and then laying them out, each in their own UV space. Now that would take a heck of a long time manually. If I select all of these, I think there's over 400 of them just right here. So anyway, you can't do that manually. That would take too long. So I wrote a script. Where's my script editor? And I'll post this below in the comments. So in this script, it's going to iterate through all the objects you have selected. It's going to perform an auto projection on it. It's going to then move the UV shell to the U and V tile space that you specify, and that is just iterated. The max U for a UDIM is 10, and then it can go V for, I don't know if there's a limit, but at 10 you pop it up. So in other words, if I open up my UV editor, this is one tile, U1, V1. This will be U, um, I'm sorry, this is U0, V0, U1, V0, etc., U2, 3, 4, pretty much your X and Y coordinates here. So I'm going to lay them out. Each object is going to have its own tile, and it's going to just continue that until we're done iterating through all the objects. So to do that, I'm going to select all of my rocks again, and I'm just doing this by the shader. So I have all my rocks selected, and I'm just going to execute this. And this should go through and lay out our UDIM tiles for us. So let's verify that worked. Let's select these again. Sometimes it doesn't load all of them at once, but if I focus on one, I can see it's way the heck out in no man's land. So let's try that again. Let's select them all. There they are. So here's all the rocks, and it laid it out all tiled up, and each one is in its own tile. So now when we bake, it can bake out a texture for each one of these, and we can read them in all with one shader. So that's pretty neat. Also part of the script, because you're not always going to want to poly auto project. This could work as well if you already had UVs for these objects. You just have to select them instead of project, in essence. So I'll post the script below. It's handy. I've used it many times. So now that we have all the UDIMs set up, we need to bake. We need to set that up. So if we go in here, now we're in the hypershade. So if I break this down, I kind of separated it out. That's our displacement. This is the base granite layer. This is the base moss layer, and then this is the mask for the moss. So it's a couple of dirt textures multiplied over a PXR curvature. So this is kind of the point here is we don't want to have to compute this every single time we hit render. We want to bake it out, so it's already there. So where we're going to plug this in, PXR bake texture. It accepts a color or a float, and in my case, I'm just baking out a mask, so I just need a float value. And then it can work as a pass-through node as well, so you can just plug that right in, and right out of the gate, it's not going to do anything, but it won't break your renders either. It just is a pass-through when set up this way. So to set up the parameters here, the file name is going to be the name of the texture that you're baking out. So, and it's also the texture that it's being read in when you're rendering as well. So it works both ways. So we're gonna do workspace root. We're just gonna specify wherever we want all these textures to go. There's gonna be several of them. Granite, mossy, moss bake. And then this is going to be the name of the texture in my case. So moss mask underscore, and then this is the identifier for the UDIM. So map ID all caps .exr. So having it set to UDIM will substitute this string with the ID of the UV tile at render or at bake time. So that'll write out and you'll see after it's baked out. And then the rest of the options are used for well, I guess some of them are used for baking. So the texture resolution here, 512 is more than adequate in my case. If you want to disable this so it doesn't overwrite a previous bake, you can disable it. And then the render modes. Automatic will, when you're rendering, will look for a file texture and use it if it's available. If not, it'll read the upstream procedural connections or the upstream connections. Input will only read the upstream, and texture will only read from disk. And if not, you'll get a missing color if the file doesn't exist. So this looks good to me. I'm going to go ahead and do a RenderMan bake render. So it'll spool to local queue, and this will take a little bit, 7-ish minutes. I've done this before, so I'm going to end up pausing this and resuming after it's done. The end result is, you'll see 434 different EXRs, which are the masks for each one of the rocks that I had. So the underscore map ID underscore was substituted with the UV tile. So on render, at render time, this map ID will get substituted again with the UV tile ID that it sees in the file name and apply that, which is awesome. Keeping the render mode on automatic will, again, look for the texture on disk and use that if it's available. If not, it'll still calculate the upstream procedural. So this is good if I were to apply the shader to a different object down the road. I don't want to have to rebake everything. It'll still work. And then always get in a good habit of disabling the bake texture when you're done, or more than likely you'll end up overriding some previous baked maps by accident because when you do a bake render, it's going to calculate all your PXR bake textures in your scene. So always a good habit to disable them when you're done. So if I were to do a quick IPR here, you'll see, hopefully, yeah, we have our moss that is masked just like the procedural was. So this is awesome. We're reading all those different EXRs from disk and not having to compute that at render time. So this is all I wanted to demonstrate today. This is useful. You can bake out not just mass, you can do colors. So if you're projecting different things, you can bake those out. But again, this saves render time and it adds up quick. So anyway, if you guys like this, hit the like button. If you have any other suggestions for another video tutorial or anything, let me know. Hit me up in the notes below. And thanks again.